There's a man you used to know. You may not have thought about him in a while, but if you are honest, you can see his face right now. He used to be around. He was not the loudest in the room, maybe not even the most visible, but he was there. At the cookout, at the bar on a Friday, in the group chat, not always talking, but present. You could feel him in the room the way you feel a wall at your back, steady, accounted for. And then, slowly, so slowly that no one marked the day it started, he began to disappear. It was not dramatic. There was no argument, no falling out, no moment you could point to and say that is when it changed. He just started saying no, not aggressively, not with any edge to it. Just a quiet, repeated no that sounded like, maybe next time, and I'm pretty beat tonight, and let me check my schedule and get back to you. And he never got back to you. And he never got back to you. The invitations kept going out for a while because the group remembered him. But memory has a shelf life when it is not refreshed by presence. Eventually, the invitations slowed, then they stopped. And the group adjusted around his absence the way water fills the space where a stone used to be. Smoothly, without ceremony, as if he had never been there at all. You noticed. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you noticed. Maybe you sent a text. Maybe you thought about sending one and then got distracted and forgot. Maybe you told yourself he was fine. He was just busy. He was going through something and would come back around when he was ready. People say that about disappearing men the way they say it about the weather. He will come back around. As if return is automatic. As if a man who has practiced absence for months will one day wake up and reverse the current without anyone reaching in to pull him. Here's what I need you to hear. That man I just described, the one who faded out of his own life so gradually that no one sounded the alarm? You are him, or you are becoming him, and the fact that something in your chest just tightened tells me you already know. You did not choose isolation. No man sits down one morning and decides, today I will begin the process of disappearing from every meaningful relationship in my life. That is not how it works. It works like erosion. One night you stay home instead of going out, and the relief you feel is so immediate, so physical, that it registers as self-care. 1 week you let the group chat scroll past without responding, and the silence feels like peace. 1 month you realize you have not spoken to your closest friend in longer than you can account for, and instead of alarm, you feel something worse. You feel nothing. The absence has become the baseline. The distance between you and the people who used to know you has become the defining architecture of your daily life, and you built it yourself, one not tonight at a time. Let me show you the pattern, because I think you have felt it but never seen it laid out this clearly. The phone face down on the table. Not because you are busy, because the notifications represent a demand you do not want to meet. The group chat you muted, not because it was loud, but because participation requires a version of you that you no longer have the energy to perform. The birthday you forgot. You did not forget. You remembered and chose not to act, and then you told yourself you forgot because that story is easier to carry than the truth, which is that reaching out felt like lifting something heavier than you were willing to bear. The friend whose call you watched ring through. You saw the name on the screen. You had time. You were not doing anything that could not be interrupted, and you watched it ring, and you watched it stop. And you felt that specific cocktail of guilt and relief that only a man who is actively choosing his own disappearance understands. You know these textures. You have lived inside them. And if you are being honest, really honest, the kind of honest that costs something, you know that what you have been calling solitude is not solitude at all. Solitude is a choice made from strength. What you are practicing is retreat, and retreat, repeated long enough, becomes a room with no door. The architecture of absence. Every man builds walls. This is not inherently wrong. A man without walls is a man without shape, without edges, without the definition that separates him from the noise of every other voice and demand. Walls are necessary. Boundaries are the architecture of a self that knows where it ends and where the world begins. The problem is not the walls. The problem is what happens when you forget to install doors. At first, it feels like wisdom. You are learning who deserves access and who does not. You are cutting out the people who drain you, the obligations that do not serve you, the social performances that leave you emptier than you were before you showed up. This feels like growth. It looks like growth. It looks like growth. The language around it even sounds like growth. Protecting my energy, setting boundaries, choosing myself. But here is what no one will say out loud. Boundaries have doors. What you are building does not. Each declined connection adds another brick. Each "I do not need this" lays another line of mortar, and the structure, from the outside, looks like independence. It looks like a man who has his life together, who is comfortable in his own company, who does not need the validation of a social calendar to feel whole. From the outside, it looks like strength. From the inside, the rooms are getting smaller. Let me trace the mechanics of this, because the cycle is so gradual that the man inside it never sees the full machine. It starts with one declined invitation, not a big one, a casual thing, drinks after work, a weekend hangout, something low stakes enough that saying no carries no visible cost. And the relief is immediate, an evening recovered, an energy expenditure avoided. A small victory of self-preservation that registers in the body as peace. The gap stretches. Between the no and the next invitation, time passes, and in that time the muscles of social initiative begin to soften. Not atrophy, not yet, just soften. The way a door that is never opened begins to stick in its frame. The gap becomes normal. The stretch between contacts that once felt uncomfortable now feels neutral. The silence is no longer something to be filled. It is the room you live in. And rooms you live in long enough stop feeling like choices. They start feeling like facts. Normal becomes comfortable. Comfortable becomes identity. You begin to narrate the isolation as a feature, not a condition. I'm just not a social person. I recharge alone. I've outgrown that phase. The language shifts from description to definition. You are no longer a man who is alone. You are a man who prefers to be alone. And those are very different architectures built from very different blueprints. But from inside the room, they feel identical. And identity becomes a load-bearing wall. Once your aloneness is wired into who you believe yourself to be, removing it threatens the entire structure. If I don't need people as a cornerstone, then admitting that you do need people is not just vulnerability. It is demolition. It is pulling a brick from the bottom of the wall and watching to see if the whole thing comes down. So you do not pull the brick, you add another one. And the wall that was meant for protection becomes a cell, built by a man who thought he was building freedom. No single decision was the mistake. That is the cruelty of it. Every individual choice was rational. Every brick made sense when it was laid. It is only when you step back and see the full structure, every reasonable no stacked on top of every justified withdrawal, that you realize what you have built. an architecture of absence, a fortress with no gate, a man who is so well defended against disappointment that he has also defended himself against everything else. The lie of self-sufficiency. Let me go deeper, because the behavior is not the engine. The bricks and the walls and the silence, those are symptoms. The engine is underneath, and it runs on something most men will never willingly examine. Why do men stop trying? Not because the world failed them, though in some cases it did. Not because people are unreliable, though in many cases they are. Men stop trying because reaching out requires something that has become intolerable to them. It requires admitting need. Sit with that for a moment. Admitting need. Feel what happens in your body when you read those two words together. There is a flinch, a contraction. Something in you pulls back from the phrase the way a hand pulls back from a hot surface, and that flinch, that involuntary recoil, is the engine. That is what drives the cycle. Most men have fused their identity to the idea that they do not need, not that they choose not to need, that they do not, that self-sufficiency is not a practice but a state, that the fully formed man is a man who requires nothing from anyone, that independence is not a skill applied selectively but a permanent condition that defines the worthy from the weak. This is a lie. But it is not the kind of lie that feels like a lie. It feels like bedrock. It has been reinforced by every story you were told about what a man is. The man who handles it alone. The man who does not complain. The man who shows up, provides, endures, and asks for nothing in return. That image, that ideal, was never a portrait of strength. It was a portrait of isolation dressed in the language of capability. And you have been wearing it like armor, without realizing that armor you never take off becomes a cage. The mask of self-sufficiency is the most socially rewarded form of avoidance a man can practice. No one intervenes on a man who says he is fine. No one challenges a man who appears to need nothing. The world, in fact, celebrates him. Independent, self-made, low maintenance. These are compliments, and they are all descriptions of a man who has successfully hidden his need for connection behind a wall of competence. But there is a difference between being complete and being sealed. A complete man has room for others. A sealed man does not. A complete man can stand alone when necessary and reach out when the moment calls for it. A sealed man can only stand alone because he has mortared the doors shut and called it wholeness. Here's the truth that will cost you something to hear. Your loneliness is not a reflection of the world's failure to show up for you. It is a reflection of your refusal to show up for yourself, not the version of yourself you perform, the actual self underneath, the one who wants to be known. The one who misses being in a room where someone remembers the small details of his life without being reminded. The one who is so tired of being strong and sufficient and fine that the word fine has become the heaviest thing he carries. The loneliness is not the disease, it is the symptom. The disease is a man who confused not needing with not wanting, and who buried the wanting so deep beneath the persona of independence that he forgot it was there. He did not forget. He chose to stop listening, because listening would require admitting that the structure he built, the identity he wears, the walls he maintains with such careful consistency are not protecting him from the world. They are protecting him from himself. From the part of himself that still needs what every human being needs, to be seen, to be known, to matter to someone in a way that is not transactional, not performative, not earned through competence, but given freely because connection is not a reward. It is a requirement. You have been treating a requirement as a luxury and wondering why your life feels like it is running on fumes. still water. There is a reason that moving water stays clean and still water does not. A river does not purify itself through effort. It purifies itself through current. The movement, the friction, the constant exchange with the banks and the rocks and the tributaries that feed it, these are not obstacles to the river's clarity. They are the mechanism of it. Take the current away. Remove the friction. Let the water settle into perfect stillness. And what do you get? Stagnation. A surface that looks like peace. Underneath, things are growing that the light cannot reach. A man without connection is still water. He does not know this because the surface of his life looks calm, orderly even. He wakes up on his own schedule. He eats what he wants. He moves through his day without the friction of other people's needs, opinions, schedules, or expectations. And this frictionless existence feels at first like the thing he was always looking for: peace, space, room to think. But peace without current is stagnation. Space without others is a void. Room to think becomes room to spiral, to narrate, to build stories about himself and his life that have no external check, no counterweight, no voice in the room saying, actually, that is not what happened. This is the deepest cut, and I need you to stay with me here, because this is the part that most men will never face. What happens to a man with no witnesses? He loses the ability to see himself. Not metaphorically, functionally. The human mind was not built to operate in isolation. It was built for calibration, for the constant unconscious adjustment that happens when you are around people who know you. The friend who says, "You're doing that thing again." The brother who calls you on your story before you finish telling it. The person who knew you before you built the persona, who can see the gap between who you are performing and who you actually are, and who has the standing to name it. Without that calibration, the self-image distorts, not dramatically, not in ways that look like madness, in ways that look like certainty. Strengths inflate, weaknesses become invisible. The narrative a man tells himself about his own life goes unchallenged for so long that it calcifies into something he mistakes for truth. He becomes the unreliable narrator of his own existence, and he does not know it because there is no one left in the room to offer a second reading. The loneliest men are not the saddest. Some of them function at high levels. They build businesses. They maintain routines. They project an image of a life that is working. But beneath that image, the inner world has gone murky. The self-assessment is off. The emotional range has narrowed. The capacity for honesty, real honesty, the kind that requires another person to hold space for what you are saying, has atrophied to the point where a man does not even know what he would say if someone asked him how he was actually doing. And this is not just about comfort. This is not about having someone to watch a game with or grab lunch with on a Saturday. Those are the surface expressions. Underneath, something far more critical is being eroded. Not just your Friday nights, not just your weekends, not just the conversations you no longer have. Your capacity for honesty is being eroded. Your ability to be known, your tolerance for the discomfort of being truly seen by another person who does not look away from the parts of you that you have learned to hide. Your chance to be challenged by someone who cares enough to disagree with you, to hold you accountable to the version of yourself you claimed you wanted to become. Your access to the version of yourself that only exists in the presence of people who see you without the mask. Because that version of you is real. It is not a performance. It is the man you become when someone has known you long enough and closely enough that the persona falls away, and what is left is not weakness, not exposure, but the actual human being underneath all the architecture. And that man, the one who exists only in the presence of a witness, is the one you are starving. Still water does not know it is stagnant. That is the danger. It feels like peace. It tastes like freedom. It is death by degrees, happening so slowly that the man inside it mistakes the dying for living. The cost of being unseen. Let me make the cost explicit, because I think you have been running the calculation wrong. You have been weighing the cost of reaching out against the cost of staying where you are, and every time, staying wins, because the cost of reaching out is immediate, tangible, and visceral. Rejection, awkwardness, the vulnerability of admitting that the gap was too long and you do not have a good reason for it. The fear that the person on the other end has already moved on, and your reaching out will be met not with warmth, but with the polite distance of someone who filled the space you left. That cost is real. I will not tell you it is not. The text that gets a short reply, the invitation that gets declined, the conversation that starts with an uncomfortable silence because too much time has passed to pretend otherwise. These risks are genuine, and a man who is honest about them is not weak for hesitating. But you have been measuring that cost against the wrong baseline. You have been comparing the risk of reaching out against the comfort of tonight, against the peace of this evening, against the manageable stillness of one more day inside the walls. The real comparison is not the risk of tonight against the comfort of tonight. It is the risk of tonight against the trajectory of the next 5 years, if nothing changes. It is this moment of discomfort measured against the slow, quiet, irreversible disappearance of a man who had every capacity for connection and let it atrophy because the risk felt too high and the walls felt too solid and the stillness felt too much like peace to question. Look at the men who are 10 years further down this road than you are, not the ones who chose solitude from a place of strength, the ones who drifted into it the same way you are drifting now. What do you see? You see a man who has opinions about everything and is challenged on nothing. A man whose emotional vocabulary has shrunk to fine, tired, and busy. A man who can narrate his own story with perfect competence and zero accuracy because there is no one close enough to say, brother, that is not what is happening. That is not a portrait of independence. That is a portrait of erosion so advanced that the man inside it cannot see how much of himself has been carried away by the current that was not there, by the stillness that looked like peace and was actually decay. You are not there yet. But every day inside the walls brings you closer, and the walls do not announce when they have become permanent. They simply stop being something you maintain and become something you are. The door you bricked over. Let me return to the question I have been circling this entire time. Why did you stop trying? I have asked it 3 times now, and each time the answer has changed. First, it was the behavior, the patterns, the habits, the slow retreat that looks like preference. Then it was the engine, the terror of need, the persona of self-sufficiency, the mask that the world rewards and that rewards a man with the quiet destruction of his own inner life. Then it was the cost, the stagnation, the distorted self-image, the erosion of capacities that a man does not know he is losing until they are gone. Now the 4th time, the verdict. The cycle does not break from the outside. I need you to hear this clearly, because this is where every man who is waiting for the cycle to end on its own needs to stop waiting. No one is coming. Not because people do not care, though some have stopped caring because you taught them to. Not because the world is indifferent, though the world is, in fact, indifferent to a man who has signaled in every possible way that he does not want to be reached, No one is coming because you designed the architecture to keep them out. The door was not locked by circumstance. It was not sealed by betrayal or bad luck, or the failure of others to meet you where you are. You bricked it over yourself. One unreturned text at a time. One "I'm fine" at a time. One silent evening where the phone sat face down and the notifications went unanswered, and the distance between you and the people who used to know you grew by another inch that you told yourself did not matter. Each brick was small, each brick was reasonable, and together they sealed you inside a room that you built with your own hands and called it home. The exit is not finding better people. It is not waiting for a friendship that requires no effort, no risk, no vulnerability, no admission that you cannot do this alone. Those friendships do not exist, and the man who waits for them is a man who will wait forever, because what he is actually waiting for is a connection that costs him nothing, and connection that costs nothing is worth exactly what it costs. The exit is becoming a man who is willing to be found, and that distinction matters more than anything else in this conversation. So let me say it again. The exit is not finding people who want you. It is becoming the man who is willing to be found. This is why men fought in formations, not alone. This is why monks lived in orders, not caves. This is why builders work in crews and sailors in ships. Not because solitude has no value. It does. Solitude is the laboratory where a man meets himself. But a man who lives permanently in the laboratory, who never brings what he discovers there back into the world of other people, has confused the workspace with the life. A man who is never reflected back to himself by another pair of eyes, another voice, another presence that says, "I see you, and what I see is real," that man loses the shape of who he is. Not all at once. In the way that water loses its shape when you remove the banks. It spreads, it thins, it disappears into the ground without ever knowing it was disappearing. There is a death required here, and I will not pretend otherwise. The man who says, "I don't need this," has to die, not the man underneath. The persona, the mask. The version of you that learned to perform completeness so convincingly that even you believed the performance. That version served you once. It kept you safe in a season when safety was what you needed. But the thing that keeps you safe in one season keeps you small in the next, and you have been living in the next season for longer than you are willing to admit. Shedding that identity is not weakness. I know the word vulnerability has been thrown around so much in the last decade that it has lost its teeth, so let me give it teeth. What I am asking you to do is the hardest thing a man can do, harder than discipline, harder than grinding through exhaustion, harder than any physical challenge that lets you suffer in silence and call the silence strength. I am asking you to let the version of yourself that kept you safe also be the version of yourself that kept you alone, and to walk out of it anyway, not because walking out is comfortable, because staying inside is killing you in ways you cannot see from inside the room. The man who breaks the loneliness cycle is not the man who was never lonely. He is not the man who is naturally social, naturally connected, naturally at ease in the presence of others. He is the man who was lonely enough, honestly enough, for long enough, to stop pretending he was not. He is the man who looked at the walls he built and said, "These are mine. I laid every brick, and I am the only one who can take them down." That is not a confession of weakness. That is the most honest act of strength a man is capable of. Ownership without excuse, sight without flinching, the willingness to say, "I built this, and I am going to unbuild it, one brick at a time, starting with the hardest one, which is the one closest to the door." Let me name the fear directly, because you deserve to have it spoken rather than circled around. You are afraid of rejection. You are afraid that the text you send will get a short reply or no reply at all. You are afraid that the person you reach out to has moved on, has filled the space you left, has stopped wondering where you went. You are afraid of the awkwardness of a conversation that has to bridge months or years of silence. You are afraid of what it says about you that you disappeared. You are afraid that the admission implicit in reaching out, "I have been alone and I do not want to be anymore," will be met with pity or worse, indifference. Name it. All of it. Let it sit in the room without trying to argue it away or minimize it or pretend that these fears are not real. They are real. Every single one of them is a possible outcome, and I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. Now name the alternative. The alternative is this: the slow, quiet, irreversible disappearance of a man who had every capacity for depth, for presence, for the kind of friendship that makes a life feel witnessed and real. A man who let that capacity atrophy because the risk of a single awkward conversation outweighed, in his calculation, the cost of another year inside the walls, and another year after that, and another, until the walls are not a structure he maintains, but a fact of his existence, indistinguishable from who he is, permanent in the way that only things left unchallenged for too long can become. Put those two costs on the scale. The risk of tonight on one side, the trajectory of the next decade on the other, the awkward text that might go unanswered versus the man you will be at 50 if nothing changes, the vulnerability of admitting need versus the calcification of a self that has gone so long without a mirror that it no longer resembles what is actually there. The math is not close. You know it is not close. You have known for a long time that it is not close. What kept you from acting was never the calculation, it was the cost of the first move. Because the first move requires something that no amount of reasoning can prepare you for. It requires you to be, for one moment, the man who needs something. The man who reaches out, not from a position of strength or generosity or casual indifference, but from the simple, terrifying human position of I have been alone and I do not want to be, and I am willing to let you see that. That is the threshold. Not a conversation, not a friendship rebuilt in a single evening, not the undoing of months or years of distance in one phone call. The threshold is smaller than that and harder than that. It is the willingness to send one signal, however small, that says the door is no longer sealed, that there is a crack in the wall, that the man inside is still alive and still capable of being reached if someone cares enough to try. But you have to make the crack. No one can make it from the outside. That is the architecture you built. That is its purpose and its prison. The walls are too thick for anyone to hear you if you call from inside, and they are too well designed for anyone to know there is a man behind them who wants out. You have to take the first brick out yourself. You have to be the one who opens the door, even if only an inch, even if what you say through that inch is nothing more than, "Hey, I have been thinking about you," because that is enough. That is more than enough. That is the entire revolution compressed into 7 words. The wall does not come down in demolition. It never does. It comes down the way it went up. One brick at a time. One act of presence after months of absence. One moment of honesty after a year of "I'm fine." One text. One call. One evening where you show up to something you would have declined last week, not because you feel ready, not because the fear is gone, but because you have decided that the fear is a price you are willing to pay for the chance to stop disappearing. Readiness is a myth. If you wait until reaching out feels natural, you will wait until the walls are permanent and the question is no longer whether you will break the cycle, but whether you remember that there was ever anything outside it. You do not need to be ready. You need to be willing. And willingness is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in the presence of it. The man you are becoming in the silence is not the man you want to be. You know this. You have known it on the nights when the stillness stops feeling like peace and starts feeling like what it actually is: absence, drift, the quiet, incremental vanishing of someone who was meant for more than this. So here is what you are going to do. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when the timing feels right, or the words come together, or the courage arrives like a package you have been waiting for. Tonight, you are going to send one message to one person, someone whose name surfaced in your mind at some point while you were listening to this. You did not choose that name. It chose you. It rose up from whatever room you buried it in, and the fact that it surfaced means something. It means the connection is not dead, it is dormant. And dormant things can be woken by the smallest act of attention. Do not craft it. Do not rehearse it. Do not write and delete and rewrite until the words are smooth enough to hide the fact that you are doing something that scares you. Let it be rough. Let it be honest. Let it be nothing more than a few words that say, I am still here. I have been thinking about you. I know it has been a long time. That is enough. That is one brick removed from the wall. That is the crack through which everything else becomes possible. Not guaranteed, possible, and possibility for a man who has been living inside certainty, inside the sealed room of I don't need this, and I'm fine alone, and people are not worth the effort. Possibility is a revolution. You are not built for the still water. You are not built for rooms with no doors. You are not built for the version of strength that requires you to carry everything alone and call the carrying a virtue. You are built for the current, for the friction, for the deeply uncomfortable, deeply necessary experience of being known by someone who does not look away. The man who is willing to be found is not weaker than the man who hides. He is the man who did something the hidden man could not do. He looked at the walls, knew he built them, and took the first one down anyway. One message. Tonight, that is how it starts. Not in revelation, not in transformation, in one small act of presence that cost you nothing but your pride. And your pride was never protecting you. It was the last brick over the door. Remove it. Send the message. Let someone know you are still here. That is enough. That is the whole thing. One brick. Tonight. The rest will follow, but only if the first one moves. And only you can move it.